But what you're really here for is our speaker today. Dr. Ellington is a professional speaker, scholar, multidisciplinary artist, and award-winning author. She's the first curator of Black history at the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum, where she has been developing the collection from its initial donation. She's dedicated to telling the stories of African American and African peoples through art and research. Tameka has published 5 books, one of which was named for her internationally acclaimed exhibition, Textures, The History and Art of Black Hair. That was at Kent State University in 2021. She followed that with a brown bag lunch presentation, so you may recognize her from that, accenting a related Silk Room student exhibition downstairs here. In 2023, she partnered with the Akron Art Museum, where she curated a show entitled Retold, African American Art and Folklore. Her latest exhibition, which I hope you all remember, was our Home Again, the Embodiment of Africa Through Art and Fabric, which was part of MassMu's 2024 Big Read. And this talented lady has even assisted with painting a mural in downtown Canton. Please welcome Dr. Tameka Ellington.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I was really happy to be invited back. Since I started this process of working as curator for Black history, one of my main partners has been the Massillon Museum. I just love the people here. I've worked with them on several projects, and now, you know, they get to work with me on the projects that I'm doing, which is an amazing thing. And also too, Alex is partially responsible for me being in this position and starting the work that I'm doing here at the Stark County Black History Museum. And so when I first started at the museum, it was very, very important for me to have a really good understanding about the people that I was going to be working with, about the fact that this was at the McKinley Museum. I wanted to just see what the overall essence of the museum was, and I wanted to find out also too what was the overall essence of President McKinley, because I didn't really know very much about him. And so one of the first things I started doing when I got there was to do some research about President McKinley. And I was very happy to find that President McKinley had a great relationship with the Black community at that time. Some of his good friends were from the African Methodist Episcopal Church. When he was actually sworn in as president, his first term, the African American Episcopal Church actually gave him the Bible that he swore in with. So President McKinley was very close with the African American community. The AME Church even helped to give funding towards his campaign. And so that really made me happy to know that I'm working in a space, building a Black History Museum, knowing that the history of our president that represents that museum always had a close relationship with the Black community. And so this is something that he said when he was a congressman. So President McKinley actually served as a major in the military first, and then he became congressman and then eventually became president. And so he said, are free thought and free political action to be crushed out in one section of the country? I answer no, but that the whole power of the federal government must be exhausted in securing every citizen, Black or white, rich or poor, everywhere within the limits of the Union. Every right, civil and political, guaranteed by the Constitution and the laws. And something else that he said that really spoke to me, during his inaugural address in 1897, President McKinley had this to say, where he denounces lynching. Lynchings must not be tolerated in a great and civilized country like the United States. Courts, not mobs, must execute the penalties of the law. The preservation of public order, the right of discussion, the integrity of courts, and the orderly administration of justice must continue forever, the rock of safety upon which our government securely rests. And so for McKinley to actually feel that way during a time in our history where lynchings were a regular practice, people not only in the South were being lynched, but also lynching was also happening here in Ohio. There is record of lynching happening here, and President McKinley denounced that. And I honestly believe that that's one of the reasons why he was one of our assassinated presidents, because of his concern with the Black community, because of the fact that he wanted to work with and he saw the value in working with the Black community. President McKinley was also very close to some well-known African Americans that we know of. Booker T. Washington served as an advisor to President McKinley. And then also too, President McKinley hired, while he was in term, he also appointed very many people to office that were African American. George Henry White was one of those people. He also had various other positions within office that he appointed to Black people. He was actually the president that appointed more African American people to office than any of the presidents before him. So that was a really big deal. There's also a book, if you're interested in learning more about President McKinley and his connection with the Black community, there's a wonderful book that I started reading. It's called Forgotten Legacy: William McKinley, George Henry White, and the Struggle for Black Equality. One of the things that is a challenge right now, as you all know, we are living in a time within our history that is very hostile towards DEI, towards people of color, towards anything regarding quote unquote diversity. And this particular time in our history, building a Black History Museum at this time is actually quite challenging. Finding funding is quite challenging because we all know that unfortunately the administration has cut a lot of funding going towards anything dealing with diversity. And so part of what I'm doing is making sure that not only am I collecting these items so that I can learn and know about the history, but it's really my responsibility as curator to do my best to tell the truth about the history of what's been happening and the importance of what what Black history needs to look like for Stark County. I have unfortunately gotten some pushback about this museum. Some people have ideas about what they think the museum should be, and my responsibility as curator is to tell the full comprehensive history, all of it, the good, bad, and the ugly. That's my responsibility. And it's a challenge to do that, especially in the times that we are in right now. And so the story goes, so this museum is going to encompass Stark County's Black history, and that will include the cities of Alliance, the city of Canton, the city of Massillon, and the city of Waynesburg. And this is a map of what the final space will look like. So right now, we're actually in the process of, in capital campaign mode, we're raising funds to be able to do this museum. We need over $14 million to be able to add an addition onto the McKinley Presidential Library already existing site. And so we've had architects come out to give us some information to do some drawings for us. And so this is the space shape that the architects created for us that will house the permanent museum exhibition that will actually be up and installed by 2029. So we're hoping that all goes well, we get the funding that we need. February 2029 is when the Stark County Black History Museum will be open for all to see. But in the planning of that, you gotta plan ahead and think forward and all. So as I'm in the process of doing that, I really wanted to start thinking about how I can best tell the story. How can I tell a comprehensive story of the Black community? And so in this small space, this is about 3,500 square feet, which if you know anything about museums, 3,500 square feet is really not a lot of space. It's not a lot of space, but even with this small space, there's still a big story to tell. And so when you walk into the space, one of the things that you'll see in the very beginning is some information about some of the early settlers. You'll see as you continue to walk in some information about abolitionists and the Underground Railroad. If you are not familiar, the Stark County has many Underground Railroad sites. I've gotten a chance to visit 2 of those sites. I sit on the board for Spring Hill House here in Massillon, so you guys are really close to the Spring Hill House. If you've never gone, I really recommend going. Also too, in Alliance, there's the Haynes House. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there's some rich history here in regards to Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement. So also in this area, I'll be talking about Black codes and or AKA Black laws. Have you guys ever heard of Black codes or Black laws? Anybody ever heard of those before? Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about what that is in just a moment. And then we'll be moving into World War I, industrialization, and the Great Migration. This is during the time in history where many African Americans, if they didn't come up through the Underground Railroad as freedom seekers, or if they didn't come during the time when the Quakers were bringing formerly enslaved peoples, then they probably came during the Great Migration. And so we'll be talking about the Great Migration and African American peoples coming to Stark County at that time. In my wildest dreams, I will have something called a magic wall. If you've ever gone to Cleveland Museum of Art and you've gone into one of the first sections that they have on the first floor of the museum, is a very large digital media wall where you can go up and you can tap on things, you can learn about different parts of their collection. So I dream of our museum being able to have a smaller version of that. And with that smaller version, we will have on there the map. We'll have our collection on there, but we'll also have the City of Canton's redlining map that will give a lot of information. We have a good friend of ours, Richie Harper, who did some extensive research all about redlining in the city of Canton. So we'll feature that there. And then in this part of the museum exhibition space, we'll showcase a mini documentary on redlining. And that documentary will be in 2 different forms. We'll have a smaller, shorter version that will be on loop in the exhibition space, as well as a longer version, about 25 to 30 minutes, that we will propose to PBS. So hopefully one day you'll get a chance to see our documentary about Stark County's Black history on PBS. And then as you move in through the space, we're going to be talking about Cherry Street and urban renewal, Black neighborhoods in Stark County's educators in Stark County. And so if you didn't know, like many states, many cities across the United States, urban renewal also happened here in Stark County. And so I'll be talking about that. As we move through the space, you'll start to see in this section 6 here, information about Black professionals, entrepreneurs, organizations such as the NAACP, Urban League, and other organizations that were very instrumental in the Black community. And then we'll have a section of the exhibition space where we will cover some details about the Black church. If you did not know, one of the very first Black churches to come to Stark County was a church called St. Paul's AME, that's African Methodist Episcopal. As I mentioned before, President McKinley was very close friends with the people at the AME church. And so I talked to the pastor at St. Paul's AME just a few weeks ago. And I had been in conversation with him for several months, and I finally just said, you know what? You guys have to give me something because I need to be able to showcase you guys in this museum. And so the pastor said, well, the reason why I hadn't contacted you is because I don't have anything small that you can have. And I said, okay, well, what do you have? And he said, well, can you take a couple of church pews? I said, absolutely. And then he said, well, what about glass? What about old stained glass? I said, absolutely, I can take it. So there's a good chance that we may have from the oldest church here in Stark County, which is St. Paul's and me, we may be able to have some of their old stained glass windows in our exhibition, which would be a beautiful thing. And then as we finally move through the last portion of the exhibition space, this space will talk a little bit about some of those people that made major contributions to the Stark County area. So that would be people like our political figures, celebrity. We do have a couple celebrity people from Stark County. And then this will be also the place where I will pay homage to the donors that have been contributing to help, to get this museum up and going, as well as there's a committee of individuals that have been working now for over 20 years to get this museum up and going. And they are currently called the Committee to Preserve Stark County's Black History. And so I'll have a section in the museum where I also pay homage to those individuals. And as I mentioned, President McKinley denounced lynching. One of the first things that I noticed when I walked through, when I first started working at the McKinley Presidential Library and Museum, one of the first things that I noticed in the collection, our collections manager, she took me on a tour of all of the collection that we have. And as we were walking through, we walked past and I was like, is that what I think it is? And she was like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, where did you guys get that? Well, in this picture right here is a gallows. This gallows was donated to the museum from a lawyer from Canton. He was a criminal defense lawyer who specialized in cases about wrongful death. And he donated this gallows to the museum. And it's been sitting in storage for decades. And I asked her if it's okay if I use it in the show. And the reason why I want to use it is because, like I said, it's my responsibility to tell the full, true story of the Black community here in Stark County. And like I mentioned, Black people did get lynched in Ohio. And that is history that needs to be talked about, right? Even if it's uncomfortable history, history is what it is, right? We can't take it away, we can't alter it. We have to just tell it so that it won't happen again. And so, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about some of the early settlers on the Underground Railroad. This is a photo of the Spring Hill Historic Home here in Massillon that was built by the Quakers, Thomas and Charity Roach, and later owned by Irvine Wells and his wife. And so this is a photo of them there. I got a chance to go and visit the Spring Hill house, and they took me on a tour. I actually went during one of the best days to go. They have something every year that they do called a lantern tour. And so I got a chance to go during the lantern tour. And this photo right here is a photo of the basement level. Is a kitchen space, like a dining room space. And oftentimes when freedom seekers were coming through, that's the space of the house where they would keep those people. They would give them something to eat, allow them to have a place to rest. And if bounty hunters were looking for them, they have a special staircase that's hidden from the public, that those individuals that were freedom seekers, if they needed to go and hide, they can go up the secret staircase and go into a different part of the house. Other early settlers and Underground Railroads that we'll be talking about in this museum is the Haynes House, which is in Alliance. This is the Haynes House. It was owned by Ridgway and Sarah Grant Haynes. They were also conductors on the Underground Railroad, as well as, I'm sure you guys have probably heard about Jacob Gaskins. He's pretty famous here in the Stark County area. He was a Black man, one of the first Black people to settle in Stark County. He lived in Plain Township. He moved here in 1817 and was very active in helping freedom seekers on the Underground Railroad. And there's actually a historic marker dedicated to Jacob Gaskins. And this is over in the area, in the Plain Township, like North Canton area, if you're familiar with that area and want to go and take a look. But the historical marker is actually in place where his home used to be. And so, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're going to be talking about in this museum is something called Black laws or Black codes. Just 1 year after Ohio became a state, Ohio became a state in what year, everybody? 1803, right. So in 1803, Ohio became a state. By 1804, they established Black laws. These Black laws were restrictive laws passed in the United States after the Civil War to control the freedom of formerly enslaved African Americans and to ensure their economic and social subordination. These laws severely limited the rights of Black people by dictating their labor, movement, and legal status, often forcing them into a system of cheap labor and indentured servitude. So the people that were coming up seeking freedom from the South coming to the North, they were unfortunately surprised to find that even though they are no longer in the South, their freedom is not really freedom, right? So they're still under this restrictive barrier of the things that they can do and what they can't do. If you've ever heard of something called racial covenants, have you guys ever heard of those? Racial covenants are laws that were put in place in the early 1800s that restricted places within a city where Black people could buy property. There, and in the exhibition, I actually was able to find someone donated to me an actual deed that was owned by someone that owned a property. And in the inside of that deed, it says something to the effect of no one besides a Caucasian person or no one from any undesirable ethnicity or race should be living in this particular property. Basically, it was saying those individuals who were European immigrants, those people that were African American people in certain parts of the city, they were not able to live in those certain parts. And that's part of the reason why you still see a lot of segregation. So if you've ever been to Canton, you'll notice that the majority of Black people in Canton live on the southeast side. And that's because it was forbid for them to live anyplace else. According to the law, according to the racial covenants, they were not allowed to live anywhere else. Okay? And so also, I'll be giving some details about a little small area in Alliance called New Guinea. New Guinea was established in 1810, but by 1827, the community was said to be on the decline because people either that were there, that settled there, moved on to Michigan or Canada for their own safety. So the Quakers, when they settled in Alliance, some of the people that came with them were formerly enslaved peoples. And if you know anything about the history of the Quakers, once they came to the North, if they did have people that were enslaved, they let those people go. They gave them their freedom. And so those individuals that now were recently newly freed people, they established a community that they called New Guinea. And I think it's really interesting that they called the town New Guinea because, as we all know, there is a country in Africa called Guinea. And so it was a representation that they were making sure that they wanted to stay connected to their African heritage. And New Guinea in Canton is represented on a small little section of the map here. There were about 200 people that lived in New Guinea. And as I mentioned, by 1827, New Guinea was pretty much kind of dissipated because the people left, because there were bounty hunters looking for them. They moved on to Michigan or either went on into Canada so that they can gain their freedom. If you want to learn a little bit more about New Guinea, this is a book here, Historic Black Settlements of Ohio, that have a little bit of information in there. And when I say a little bit of information, just a little bit of information, not a whole lot. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Black settlements, that's a great book to read. We'll be talking about World War I and the Great Migration of Stark County, which was between about 1910 and 1950s. White men went on to war during World War I, and there was a need for cheap labor, which opened the door for Black economic development. So companies like Republic Steel, the Whitaker Greer Brick Company, National Fireproofing, company were some of the companies that actually purposefully sought out Black people to come and work in their facilities, since all the other people that they traditionally had, all the white men were gone to war. They needed to have somebody to keep going, to keep that company going. And so this is a photo of John Whitaker. John Whitaker actually went down south. He went to like North Carolina and Alabama, and he recruited Black families to come to live in Stark County to help run his company. And one of the things that he promised the people when they came, he said, well, not only will you have a job when you come, but you'll also have a home. So the Whitaker Greer Company actually built rows of brick homes that they offered the people in the South coming up to the North. So that was one of the like the incentives for the people to want to leave the South to come north. The Whitaker Greer Company was actually located in Alliance, Ohio. And African American people, when they migrated up from the South, coming up and looking for economic development was one of the main reasons that they came. And the fact that we now had companies like Whitaker Greer, like Republic Steel, like the Temkin Company, that were willing to offer positions to Black people was a really big deal for them. And so they decided to leave everything they had in the South and they came north. Also, if you look in this photo right here, this is a lady by the name of Rosa Mae Epps. She lived in the lost community of Altman, which is in Canton. Has anybody ever heard of the Altman community? Okay, so the Altman community originally was a community for families that lived and worked in the brickyards. This particular community, when it was first built up, was actually, the residents there were actually European immigrants. Those European immigrants eventually were able to move out and to get other residences. And then once the Brickyard Company, I think it was the National Fireproofing Company, when they went down south to recruit Black families, they also were often able to offer a home. So this building that you see behind her is actually a representation of what those homes looked like. So they were two-story round brick homes that didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water, they had to use outhouses. And this is a photo of kind of what those brickyards might have looked like in that particular time. They were round, and so I'm thinking to make construction easy there, they had the architectural illustrations for that. So they just made the houses almost kind of mimic what the brickyard looked like. And this is a woman, she's been very instrumental in the research that I've been doing. Her name is Jerry Radcliffe. And Jerry, she's actually holding a photo of one of those round brick homes that the families lived in. She's actually in the process of writing a book all about the lost community of Altman. And so, as I mentioned, redlining is a big topic that will be discussed in the exhibition. Redlining happened in the Canton area in 1930s. The partnership with the Malone University staff and students was absolutely an amazing partnership. I found out that there was a professor by the name of Jay Case. He was a historian professor. And in previous years, he had done a lot of oral history projects with his students. And I heard that he was very interested in furthering the students' research about Black community in the Stark County area. And so I reached out to him, told him what I wanted to do, and asked if they would partner with me. And so we ended up conducting about 25 or 26 interviews with Stark County community that covered Canton, Massillon, Alliance, and Waynesburg. And we had the students actually facilitate those conversations, which was really great. I got a chance to attend, I would say, most of those, but the students pretty much handled doing the interviewing for all of those documentary interviews. And so now we're in the process, as I mentioned, of putting all those interviews together into a beautiful documentary that will talk about the history of redlining. And if you've never seen the redlining map, this is what it looks like. The city of Canton was divided in the 1930s by color, according to this map. Green areas are the areas that were considered to still be good areas. And the government, when they started offering mortgages originally was not really a thing that was available, but during the Great Depression, the United States government was trying to figure out how to bring the life back to the community, how to add more economic development into the community. And so they started opening up the idea of having mortgages. So they started offering mortgages to families, basically like the mortgage that we know of today, where you can connect with the bank, get a loan for like 30 years, and maybe have to put down 3 or 5% to be able to purchase a property. Well, those mortgages, unfortunately, were not available to everybody. Those mortgages were only available to the people that lived in green or blue or even sometimes the yellow areas. But those mortgages were not available to the people that lived in the red areas. And that's where the term redlining comes from, okay? Most of the time, the people that lived in those red line areas were usually European immigrants or they were African American peoples. And so when we talk about economic development amongst the Black community, there were a lot of barriers, and homeownership was one of those barriers. Black businesses along Cherry Street. So Canton used to have a miniature version of the Black Wall Street. Have you guys ever heard of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma? So Tulsa, Oklahoma had a district of Black businesses that were booming Black businesses that had banks, anything that you can think of that the Black community might need was there on Black Wall Street. Well, Canton had a small version of that. It was called, the area was Cherry Street, or it was really Cherry Avenue, but they fondly called it Cherry Street. And so Cherry Street was born out of necessity, says Sharita Gaucher. Sharita Gaucher is one of the reporters that works for the Canton Repository. She's been at the Canton Repository now for almost 30 years. And she was interviewing with a gentleman by the name of Pastor Wilbur Allen on his podcast. And they were talking about the history of the businesses along Cherry Street. And so Cherry Street had lots of different kinds of businesses. This was the Canton Black Book. I got access to a copy of this one. And this book listed over 100 Black businesses that were along Cherry Avenue. This is a photo right here of Henry Powell. Henry Powell owned a grocery store on Lafayette Avenue in southeast Canton. This is a photo of the Brogdon Funeral Home that was also in the Cherry Street area. And then there was also a Black-owned hotel called the Johnson Hotel, or Hotel Johnson, that was owned by Raymond and Don Johnson. One of the great things about the documentary that I was able to film, I got a chance to speak to Don Johnson's grandson. I think it was his grandson, or either it was his son. I got a chance to actually ask him questions about the hotel and what it was like and the people that they served coming to this hotel. But not only did Black people have to have their own grocery stores, their own funeral homes, their own hotels, their own ice cream parlors, their own swimming pools, because as we know, during that time, everything was segregated. Black people were not allowed to use the same facilities that white people did. And not only did they have to have their own, all of those kinds of entities, but they had to have their own taxi cab companies because they were not allowed to use the same taxi cab companies as the others. This organization, this museum will also talk about this organized book right here called the Green Book. This book was organized for people that were now traveling in the United States, Black people were able to now be considered middle class, working class. They were able to now own and purchase automobiles. And in the process of owning and purchasing a new automobile, the ability to drive across country was a true virtue of freedom for the Black community, which quickly became a dangerous trip requiring strategy and ingenuity to ensure the safety of the families. So even though now Black people were able to travel across the United States, they ran into the issue of safety. There's a good chance that when they traveled, they weren't going to be able to find a place of refuge to sleep. So Black people usually carried two things when they traveled with them. They usually had a bag of chicken, and they probably had their toiletries with them, because there was a good chance that they were not going to be able to find a restaurant that could serve them, and they probably were not going to be able to find a hotel or a place to stay overnight. So a lot of times they slept in their car. The car became a safety space, a place of refuge, and the Green Book became that list, that organized list that told them where they could go and where they should go. So that Green Book listed barbershops, it listed churches, it listed restaurants, anything a Black traveler would need, that Green Book listed. And so the reconstruction of Cherry Avenue in Black neighborhoods, we'll definitely be talking about that. Urban renewal in Canton happened in the 1960s and 70s. Neighborhoods in the Madison, Lathrop, and Lafayette Street, families, they lost their homes and oftentimes were housed in housing projects. So there's a book that was written and self-published by a gentleman by the name of Melvin Howell, and he took some great photos and had some great photos in this book. So this was like really the only way that I could see what Cherry Street looked like before urban renewal. So this is a photo of what it looked like before. This is what Cherry Street looks like now. Cherry Street is now US Route 30. So all of those businesses that I just previously talked about, those 100 businesses that were, booming in that area, were all destroyed because of Cherry Avenue being now transformed into US 30. One of the things that you'll find, and someone donated this photo to me, and it was just so telling to me. Whenever you think about Black neighborhoods in those areas that are redlined, oftentimes those neighborhoods are in industrial areas. Oftentimes the railway will cut right in the middle of those Black communities. And these little kids standing in front of the railway is just such a telling photo. So this was the Madison Lathrop neighborhood that had gotten destroyed because of the urban renewal. So I'll be talking a little bit about educators in the Black Student Union. One of my favorite educators is a lady by the name of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She's a professor of law. I have been doing research about feminism and something called misogynoir and misogyny and all these things. And so Dr. Crenshaw is the one who created the theory called intersectionality. Has anybody ever heard of intersectionality? Okay, so Dr. Crenshaw is a brilliant scholar. She's actually from Canton. I reached out to her, told her what we were doing, and asked her if she would be willing to allow us to have her information and her family's information in the museum, and she said yes. So I was really excited to learn about that. And then Parmalee Watkins Compton is one of the first Black women to serve as an administrator of Canton schools. And this group right here, this group of people, this is the Canton McKinley High School class of 1971. They had a member of their class reach out to me and tell me about the initiation of the Black Student Union. So in the 1970s, this particular group of individuals were students at McKinley High School. They went to their administration and asked them to add Black history into the curriculum. Unfortunately, the administration told them no. And so the students decided that they were going to teach themselves Black history. And so they all went out and purchased this book. And this is the book that they began to teach themselves with during their lunch period. So those students continue to get together every year. they have a annual reunion where they reflect back on all the things that they had done and keeping the Black Student Union alive at the McKinley High School. The military is a big deal, and we'll be talking about the military here in the exhibition. This is a photo of Taylor Matthews, who was a well-known photographer in Canton. He took lots of different photos, and he was also in the Army. And this is a photo of Marva Dodson. She has a World War II uniform of First Sergeant Frank McKinley. Is that how you pronounce his last name? Clendening. That's a hard name to say. But he was one of the original Buffalo Soldiers. Have you guys ever heard of Bob Marley and the Wailers song Buffalo Soldiers? Well, they dedicated that song to gentlemen in World War II that were part of this Buffalo Soldier regiment. So the museum will actually have an authentic Buffalo Soldier uniform. And then we'll talk a little bit about some athletes. You may be happy or unhappy to find out that this museum will not carry anything about football. I refuse to put football in the museum. Canton and Stark County is so much more than just football. And there are people that came from the community that deserve to be talked about. So Renee Powell and her family, famous golf family here in Canton, will be talked about. Eric Snow, basketball player who used to play with the Cavs, will be talked about. There's a boxer, Marion O'Connor, and Gerald Hammond were both professional boxers. They'll be paid homage to in this museum. And then we know celebrities, OJ's and Macy Gray are both from Canton. I'm still trying to get in touch with them to give me some items. So I've been like stalking them. And so hopefully I'll be able to find out something soon from them. And then we'll talk about some community first. So this is some of the people that were the first in the community to do some amazing things. So the first Black police officers in Alliance were Lionel and Leon Grimes. Esther Archer was one of the first Black women to serve on the Canton City Municipal Office. And then Dr. Oscar Ritchie, he's from Massillon. He was the first Black professor at Kent State University. And I'm an alum at Kent State, and Kent State University has a building named after Oscar Ritchie. And so for me, now in this position, to learn about that history really is it's a big deal to me. And then we'll also talk a little bit about a gentleman by the name of David Whitehurst. He was the first Black person to play with the Canton Symphony Orchestra in the 1950s. And so just to end, I wanted to invite you all. I brought some flyers with me, some cards that will be the first exhibition for the Stark County Black History Museum. Will take place on Juneteenth. So Juneteenth is June 19th, so it's a Friday evening at 6 p.m. We'll have the very first showing of the Stark County Black History Museum. And this particular showing is a preview show, because remember I was telling you that the actual museum won't be built until 2029. So this is kind of like a little show that'll like whet your fancy or you know, like get you excited about what the future is gonna hold, right? And so thank you so much to the Massillon Museum for inviting me. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for listening.